The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor buzzed with the kind of malicious gossip that the English aristocracy had perfected into an art form. Lady Beatrice Harrington held court from her position on the burgundy velvet settee, her sharp eyes glittering with the satisfaction of someone who had just delivered a particularly devastating piece of social commentary. "Can you imagine?" she was saying to her rapt audience of society matrons, her voice dripping with disdain. "Emily Carter, the Earl of Westbrook's own daughter, has actually agreed to marry that nobody. What was his name again? Nicholas something or other. A man with no title, no fortune, no connections whatsoever." "Nicholas Ashford," supplied Lady Margaret Sinclair, adjusting her pearl necklace with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she took genuine pleasure in other people's misfortunes. "Though I use the term gentleman loosely. From what I understand, he's some sort of tradesman." The word was pronounced with the kind of horror usually reserved for discussing plague or pestilence, and several of the assembled ladies actually shuddered at the thought. "A tradesman?" gasped the Dowager Viscountess of Bramwell, pressing her jeweled hand to her chest as if the very concept might cause her to swoon. "And she's the daughter of an earl. What can Lord Westbrook be thinking allowing such a match? Desperation, I should think." Lady Beatrice replied with the kind of cruel satisfaction that made her one of the most feared gossips in London. "The family's finances have been in decline for years. I suspect they're so deeply in debt that they're willing to accept any man with enough coin to settle their obligations, regardless of his breeding." "But surely there must have been other options," protested Lady Sinclair. "Emily Carter is quite beautiful after all. Surely some gentleman of proper standing would have been willing to overlook the family's financial difficulties for the sake of her looks." "Beautiful she may be," Lady Beatrice conceded with obvious reluctance, "but beauty fades and breeding tells. No man of true quality would tie himself to a family so obviously in decline. This Nicholas Ashford fellow is probably the best she could manage under the circumstances." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lady Catherine Blackwood, a woman whose opinion carried considerable weight in society circles due to her impeccable connections and razor-sharp wit. She settled herself in an available chair with the kind of graceful authority that commanded immediate attention. "I take it you're discussing the Carter-Ashford engagement," she said without preamble, her tone suggesting that she found the entire topic rather tedious. "Indeed we are," Lady Beatrice replied, clearly hoping for support from this influential newcomer. "We were just expressing our surprise at Emily's choice of husband." "Surprise?" Lady Catherine raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I would have thought horror might be a more accurate description. The poor girl has clearly been driven to desperation by her family's circumstances." "You've met this Nicholas Ashford, then?" asked Lady Sinclair eagerly. "Briefly, at the Middleton soirée last month. Unremarkable in every way. Average height, average looks, average conversation. The kind of man one forgets the moment he leaves the room. Certainly not the sort of person one would expect to find in polite society, let alone marrying into it." "And yet Emily Carter seems quite taken with him," observed the Dowager Viscountess with obvious bewilderment. "I saw them together at Lady Thornbury's musical, and she appeared genuinely happy in his company." "Desperation can masquerade as happiness," Lady Beatrice said dismissively. "The poor girl is simply making the best of an impossible situation. What choice does she have? It's either marry this nobody or face complete social ruin when her family's debts become public knowledge." Meanwhile, in the gardens of Westbrook House, the subject of their gossip was walking arm in arm with the man they so thoroughly dismissed, blissfully unaware of the storm of speculation swirling around her engagement. Emily Carter was indeed beautiful, with auburn hair that caught fire in the afternoon sunlight, emerald green eyes that sparkled with intelligence and warmth, and the kind of natural grace that made even her simplest movements appear choreographed. At 22, she possessed not only physical beauty, but also a quick wit and generous heart that had made her a favorite among the younger set of London society, at least until her engagement had made her an object of pity and ridicule. "You're very quiet today," Nicholas observed, his voice carrying the kind of gentle concern that had first attracted Emily to him. "Are you having second thoughts about our engagement?" Emily looked up at her fiancé, taking in his familiar features with the kind of fond affection that had grown steadily over the months of their courtship. Nicholas Ashford was not, she had to admit, the sort of man who commanded attention in a crowded room. He was of average height and build, with brown hair that refused to stay properly styled, and grey eyes that were more notable for their kindness than their striking colour. His clothes, while well-made, were simple and practical rather than fashionable, and his manner was more earnest than charming. But Emily had learned to look beyond surface appearances, and what she saw in Nicholas was far more valuable than conventional handsomeness or aristocratic bearing. He was intelligent without being condescending, kind without being weak, and possessed of a quiet confidence that she found deeply attractive. "Never," she said firmly, squeezing his arm with genuine affection. "I was simply thinking about how different my life will be once we're married." "Different how?" Nicholas asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "You know how," Emily replied with a rueful smile. "I'll no longer be Lady Emily Carter, daughter of an earl. I'll be Mrs. Nicholas Ashford, wife of a— Well, what is it exactly that you do for a living? You've always been rather vague about your business interests." Nicholas was quiet for a moment, and Emily noticed that he seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "I'm involved in various enterprises," he said finally. "Import and export, primarily. Some investments in manufacturing. Nothing that would interest you, I'm sure." "Everything about you interests me," Emily said sincerely. "I just wish you would trust me enough to share the details of your work. After all, I'll be your wife soon. Surely I have a right to know how we'll be supporting ourselves." "You'll never want for anything," Nicholas said, his voice carrying a note of certainty that Emily found both reassuring and puzzling. "I can promise you that." "I'm not worried about wanting for luxuries," Emily replied. "I've grown quite accustomed to living modestly, but I would like to understand what our life together will look like. Will we live in London, the country? Will I be expected to help with your business in any way?" Nicholas stopped walking and turned to face her, his grey eyes serious and intent. "Emily, there are things about my situation that I haven't told you. Things that I will explain, but not yet. I need you to trust me a little longer." "What sort of things?" Emily asked, feeling a flutter of unease in her chest. "Nicholas, you're not involved in anything questionable, are you?" "Nothing questionable," Nicholas assured her quickly. "Nothing that would bring shame to you or your family. I have my reasons for maintaining a certain level of privacy about my affairs." Emily studied his face, seeing something there that she couldn't quite identify. There was a tension in his expression, a guardedness that suggested he was carrying some sort of burden that he couldn't or wouldn't share with her. "Very well," she said finally, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "I'll trust you. But Nicholas, I hope you understand that marriage should be a partnership. I don't want to be kept in the dark about important matters that affect our future together." "You won't be," Nicholas promised, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture that was both gallant and reassuring. "After we're married, I'll explain everything. You have my word." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Emily's younger sister, Charlotte, who came running across the garden with the kind of breathless excitement that suggested she was bearing news of considerable importance. "Emily!" Charlotte called out as she reached them, her cheeks flushed with exertion and her blonde curls escaping from their pins. "You must come inside at once. Mama is in such a state, and Papa is locked in his study with Mr. Whitmore, and there are creditors at the door demanding immediate payment of debts I didn't even know we had." Emily felt her stomach drop at her sister's words. She had known that their family's financial situation was precarious, but she hadn't realized that things had deteriorated to the point where creditors were making public demands for payment. "How many creditors?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady for Charlotte's sake. "3 that I saw, but Mama says there are others who have sent letters demanding meetings. She's convinced that we'll be completely ruined within the month if something isn't done immediately." Emily looked at Nicholas, seeing her own concern reflected in his grey eyes. "I should go to her," she said. "Mama will need my support to get through this." "Of course," Nicholas agreed. "Would you like me to come with you? Perhaps I can be of some assistance." "That's very kind of you," Emily said, though she wasn't entirely sure what help Nicholas could provide in such a situation. "But I think it might be better if I spoke with my parents privately first. Family financial matters are, well, they're rather personal." "I understand," Nicholas said, though Emily thought she detected a note of frustration in his voice. "But Emily, please remember that we're to be married soon. Your family's concerns are my concerns as well." "I know," Emily replied, squeezing his hand gratefully, "and I appreciate your willingness to help, but let me see how serious the situation really is before we involve you in our troubles." As Emily hurried toward the house with Charlotte, she couldn't shake the feeling that her world was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The creditors at the door were just the latest in a series of financial crises that had been plaguing her family for months, and she was beginning to fear that even her marriage to Nicholas might not be enough to save them from complete ruin. The scene that greeted her in the main drawing room was even worse than Charlotte had described. Lady Westbrook sat on the sofa looking pale and shaken, while three stern-faced men in dark suits stood nearby with the kind of impatient authority that suggested they were not accustomed to being kept waiting. "Gentlemen," Emily said, entering the room with as much dignity as she could muster, "I am Lady Emily Carter. I understand you have business with my family." The eldest of the three men, a thin fellow with greying hair and sharp features, stepped forward with a slight bow. "Lady Emily, I am Mr. Thornfield, representing the firm of Thornfield and Associates. We are here regarding several outstanding debts owed by your father, the Earl of Westbrook." "What sort of debts?" Emily asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Gambling debts, primarily," Mr. Thornfield replied, with the kind of blunt honesty that suggested he had no patience for social niceties. "Also several loans that were taken out against the estate and have now come due. The total amount owed is substantial." "How substantial?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. £23,000, Mr. Thornfield said without emotion. "Due immediately, or we will be forced to begin proceedings to seize the estate and all its contents." Emily felt the blood drain from her face at the staggering sum. £23,000 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime, and certainly far more than her family could hope to raise in any reasonable amount of time. "Surely there must be some arrangement that can be made," she said desperately. "Some payment plan that would allow my father time to raise the necessary funds." "I'm afraid not," Mr. Thornfield replied firmly. "Lord Westbrook has already defaulted on several previous arrangements. Our clients are no longer willing to extend additional credit or accept partial payments." "Then what are you proposing?" Emily asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Complete payment within 7 days, or we begin legal proceedings to recover the debt through the sale of the estate and all its assets." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence, and Emily felt her knees go weak at the implications. If her family lost Westbrook House, they would be left with nothing: no home, no income, no social position, and no hope of recovery. I need to speak with my father," Emily said finally, struggling to maintain her composure in front of the creditors. "Of course, Mr. Thornfield said with a slight nod. "But please understand that time is of the essence. 7 days, Lady Emily, not a moment longer." After the creditors left, Emily found herself alone with her mother in the drawing room, both women too shocked to speak for several long minutes. "What are we going to do?" Lady Westbrook finally whispered, her voice broken with despair. "How can we possibly raise such an enormous sum in just 7 days?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, sinking into a chair as the full weight of their situation settled over her. "But we have to try. We have to find a way. The only way would be to find someone willing to pay our debts in exchange for some consideration," Lady Westbrook said carefully. "Someone with both the means and the motivation to help us." Emily looked at her mother, understanding the implication behind her words. "You're talking about my marriage to Nicholas. He's offered to help with our financial difficulties before," Lady Westbrook said hopefully. "Perhaps if you explained the urgency of our situation, he might be willing to advance us the money we need." "Mama, Nicholas is a tradesman," Emily said gently. "He's comfortable, certainly, but £23,000, that's an enormous sum. I doubt he has access to that kind of money." "But surely he must have some resources," Lady Westbrook insisted. "Some way of raising the funds we need. After all, he's confident enough about his prospects to marry the daughter of an earl." Emily considered this, remembering Nicholas's assurances that she would never want for anything, his mysterious reluctance to discuss the details of his business affairs, and the quiet confidence with which he spoke about their future together. Perhaps there was more to his financial situation than she had realized. "I'll speak with him," she decided. "I'll explain our situation and ask if there's anything he can do to help. But Mama, we need to be prepared for the possibility that even he won't be able to save us from this." "Then we'll face whatever comes together," Lady Westbrook said, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "At least you'll have a husband to protect you regardless of what happens to the rest of us." Emily nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that her marriage to Nicholas was about to become far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The man she loved was about to be asked to prove his devotion in the most concrete way possible, and she wasn't entirely sure he would be able to meet the challenge. But as she prepared to seek him out and explain their desperate situation, Emily had no idea that she was about to discover that everything she thought she knew about her fiancé was about to be turned completely upside down. The revelation. The library at Westbrook House had always been Emily's sanctuary, a place where she could retreat from the pressures of society and lose herself in books that transported her to worlds far removed from the constraints of aristocratic life. But tonight, as she waited for Nicholas to arrive for their urgent meeting, the familiar room felt more like a prison than a refuge. She had sent word to his lodgings earlier that evening, asking him to call on her as soon as possible regarding a matter of extreme importance. The message had been deliberately vague. She could hardly put the details of her family's financial ruin in writing, but she had hoped that the urgency in her tone would convey the seriousness of their situation. When Nicholas finally arrived, Emily was struck once again by how unremarkable he appeared. His brown hair was slightly disheveled from the evening air, his simple but well-made coat showed signs of wear, and his overall appearance was that of a man who worked for his living rather than one who lived off inherited wealth. "Emily," he said, crossing the room to take her hands in his, "your message sounded urgent. What's happened?" "Please sit down," Emily said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I'm afraid I have some rather distressing news to share with you." Nicholas settled himself in the indicated chair, his grey eyes serious and attentive. "Tell me what's wrong." Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she knew would be a difficult conversation. "My family is ruined, Nicholas. Completely and utterly ruined." "What do you mean?" Nicholas asked, though something in his expression suggested that he might have suspected the truth about the Westbrook family's finances. "My father owes £23,000 to various creditors," Emily said, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. "Gambling debts, loans against the estate, other obligations that I didn't even know existed. We have 7 days to pay the full amount, or they'll seize everything, the house, the land, all of our possessions." Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. £23,000, he repeated slowly. That's a considerable sum." "It's impossible," Emily said, her voice breaking slightly despite her efforts to remain composed. "We don't have anything close to that amount, and there's no way to raise it in 7 days. We're going to lose everything, Nicholas, everything." "And you're telling me this because—" Emily felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment at having to ask, but their situation was too desperate for false pride. "Because I was hoping, that is, I wondered if you might have any suggestions for how we might address this crisis, or perhaps you might be in a position to help us yourself." "You're asking me to pay your family's debts," Nicholas said quietly. "I'm asking if it's possible," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's an enormous sum, and I know we have no right to ask such a thing of you, but Nicholas, if there's any way you could help us, even partially, I would be forever grateful." Nicholas stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened garden with his hands clasped behind his back. Emily watched him anxiously, trying to read his thoughts in the set of his shoulders and the tilt of his head. "Emily," he said finally, without turning around, "what would you say if I told you that £23,000 is not an insurmountable sum for me?" "I would say that I don't understand what you mean," Emily replied, confusion evident in her voice. "Nicholas, you're a tradesman. A successful one, certainly, but £23,000 is more money than most people see in a lifetime. And what if I told you that I'm not exactly what I appear to be?" Emily felt a chill of unease run down her spine at his words. "What do you mean by that?" Nicholas turned around to face her, and Emily was surprised to see something that looked almost like resignation in his grey eyes. "I mean that I haven't been entirely honest with you about my circumstances." "What kind of dishonesty?" Emily asked, her voice growing sharper with concern. "Nicholas, please don't tell me that you've been deceiving me about your ability to support a wife. Because if you can't afford to marry me, we need to discuss—" "I can afford to marry you," Nicholas interrupted. "I can afford to marry you 100 times over. I can afford to pay your family's debts without it making the slightest dent in my fortune. I can afford to buy this house, this estate, and half the county if I chose to do so." Emily stared at him in complete bewilderment. "That's impossible. You're a tradesman. You live in modest lodgings. Your clothes, your manner, everything about you suggests comfortable but limited means." "Everything about me suggests exactly what I wanted it to suggest," Nicholas said quietly. "Emily, I haven't been honest with you about who I am." "Then who are you?" Emily asked, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, as if he were gathering the courage to speak words that would change everything between them. "I am Nicholas Ashford," he said finally, "but I'm also the Duke of Ravenshollow." The words hit Emily like a physical blow, and she felt the room spin around her as the implications of his confession sank in. That's impossible," she whispered. "I'm afraid it's not," Nicholas replied gently. I inherited the title and the fortune that goes with it when my uncle died 3 years ago. I'm one of the wealthiest men in England, Emily. The modest tradesman you fell in love with is a fiction I created because I wanted to know what it felt like to be valued for myself rather than my title and fortune. Emily felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about the man she loved, everything she had based her feelings on, had been a lie. "You deceived me," she said, her voice growing stronger with anger. "You let me believe you were someone you're not. You let my family struggle with financial difficulties while you sat on a fortune that could have solved all our problems with ease." "I never intended for things to go this far," Nicholas said, taking a step toward her. "When I first started this deception, it was meant to be temporary. I was tired of being pursued by fortune hunters, tired of never knowing if people cared about me or my title. I wanted to experience what it felt like to be courted for my own merits." "And you thought the best way to do that was to lie to me?" Emily demanded, rising from her chair with indignation blazing in her emerald eyes. "You thought you could build a relationship based on deception and somehow expect it to be genuine." "I fell in love with you," Nicholas said desperately. "That was never part of the plan. I was supposed to enjoy a few months of anonymity and then return to my real life. But you made me want to be the man you thought I was. You made me want to deserve your love." "How can you talk about deserving my love when everything between us has been built on lies?" Emily asked, her voice breaking with pain and betrayal. "I fell in love with Nicholas Ashford, the modest tradesman who valued honesty and simplicity. That man doesn't exist, does he?" "He does exist," Nicholas insisted. "He exists because you brought him to life." "Emily, everything I've shown you about my character, my feelings, my devotion to you, all of that is real. The only thing I lied about was my circumstances." "Your circumstances define who you are," Emily shot back. "A duke doesn't live the same life as a tradesman. A duke has responsibilities, obligations, a position in society that affects everything he does. You're not the same person at all." "I'm exactly the same person," Nicholas said firmly. "I have the same thoughts, the same feelings, the same love for you that I've always had. The title doesn't change who I am inside." "Doesn't it?" Emily asked bitterly. "Then why did you feel the need to hide it from me? If it doesn't matter, why couldn't you trust me with the truth?" Nicholas was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with how to explain his motivations in a way that Emily might understand. "Because I've seen what my title does to people," he said finally. "I've watched women who barely knew me convince themselves they were in love with me because of what I represented, rather than who I was. I've seen friendships change the moment people learned about my fortune. I wanted something real, Emily, something that wasn't tainted by expectations and social positioning. So you decided to build that something real on a foundation of lies," Emily said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How wonderfully logical." "I know how it sounds," Nicholas said desperately. "I know I handled this badly, but Emily, please try to understand, I never meant to hurt you. I was going to tell you the truth before we married. I was going to explain everything and hope that you could forgive me for the deception." "And when exactly were you planning to have this revelation?" Emily asked. "On our wedding night, after I'd already committed my life to a man who doesn't exist." "I don't know," Nicholas admitted. "I kept telling myself I would find the right moment, but every time I tried to imagine having this conversation, I was terrified that you would react exactly the way you're reacting now." "You mean with anger and betrayal? How did you expect me to react to discovering that my fiancé has been lying to me about something so fundamental? I hoped you would understand that my feelings for you are genuine, regardless of the circumstances under which we met," Nicholas said quietly. "I hoped you would see that the man you fell in love with is real, even if his situation is different from what you believed." Emily turned away from him, walking to the fireplace and staring into the flames as she tried to process everything he had told her. The man she had agreed to marry was not a modest tradesman, but one of the most powerful and wealthy men in England. Everything she had thought she knew about their future together had been based on false assumptions. "What happens now?" she asked without turning around. "Do you expect me to simply accept this revelation and continue with our engagement as if nothing has changed?" "I hope you will," Nicholas said carefully. "Emily, I love you. That hasn't changed, and it won't change regardless of what you decide about our future. But I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me for the way I've handled this." "Forgive you?" Emily turned around to face him, her emerald eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and pain. "Nicholas, you've made me complicit in a deception that has made me the laughingstock of London society. Do you have any idea what people have been saying about our engagement? They've been mocking me for agreeing to marry beneath my station, pitying me for being so desperate that I would accept a tradesman as a husband." "I know," Nicholas said quietly. "I've heard the gossip. And you let it continue. You let people ridicule me, let them question my judgment and my family's desperation, when you could have stopped it all with a single word of truth. I couldn't reveal my identity without risking exposure of the entire deception," Nicholas said defensively. "If I had corrected the gossips, they would have wanted to know why I had been masquerading as someone else in the first place." "So you protected your own reputation at the expense of mine," Emily said, her voice growing colder. "How very noble of you." "That's not fair," Nicholas protested. "I never wanted you to be hurt by this. I hoped that once the truth came out, people would see that you had made an excellent match after all." "An excellent match built on deception and lies," Emily replied bitterly. "What a wonderful foundation for a marriage." They stood in silence for several long moments, the weight of Nicholas's revelation hanging between them like an insurmountable barrier. Emily felt as if her entire world had been turned upside down, as if everything she had believed about her life and her future had been revealed as an illusion. "I need time to think," she said finally. "I need time to decide what this means for our engagement, for our future, for everything." "Of course," Nicholas said, though his voice carried a note of desperation. "Take all the time you need. But Emily, please remember that my love for you is real, regardless of everything else." "Is it?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can I trust anything you say when you've been lying to me from the moment we met?" "Because you know me," Nicholas said intensely. "You know my character, my heart, my soul. You know the man I am when I'm with you. That man is real, Emily. That man loves you more than life itself." Emily looked at him standing there in her family's library, this man who was both familiar and completely foreign to her now. She could see the sincerity in his grey eyes, could hear the genuine emotion in his voice, but she could no longer trust her own judgment about anything concerning Nicholas Ashford, or whoever he really was. "I think you should go," she said quietly. "I think we both need time to consider what this revelation means for our future." "Emily, please," she interrupted, her voice breaking slightly. "Just, please go. I can't think clearly with you here, and I need to be able to think clearly about this." Nicholas nodded reluctantly, though every line of his body suggested that leaving was the last thing he wanted to do. "I'll wait to hear from you," he said. "However long it takes, I'll wait." After he left, Emily sank back into her chair, her mind reeling with the implications of everything she had learned. The man she had agreed to marry was not who she thought he was. The future she had envisioned was based on false assumptions. And worst of all, she was no longer sure she could trust her own feelings about anything. But even as she struggled with her anger and sense of betrayal, Emily couldn't deny that Nicholas's revelation had solved her family's most pressing problem. If he was indeed the Duke of Ravenshollow, then £23,000 would be a trivial sum to him. Her family could be saved from ruin with a word from the man she had thought was a simple tradesman. The question was whether she could bring herself to marry a man who had deceived her so completely, even if that marriage would save everything she held dear. As Emily sat alone in the library, staring into the dying fire, she realized that her life had just become infinitely more complicated than she had ever imagined possible. Society's shock, the news of Nicholas Ashford's true identity, spread through London society with the speed and intensity of a wildfire in drought season. Within hours of the revelation, every drawing room in Mayfair was buzzing with the shocking discovery that the man they had dismissed as a nobody was actually one of the most powerful and wealthy dukes in England. Lady Beatrice Harrington sat in her opulent morning room, her face pale with the kind of shock that came from discovering that one's most cherished assumptions had been completely wrong. Around her, the same women who had gathered just days earlier to mock Emily Carter's choice of husband now sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of their error. "The Duke of Ravenshollow," Lady Margaret Sinclair repeated for the third time, as if saying the words aloud might help her understand them better. "Nicholas Ashford is the Duke of Ravenshollow. One of the richest men in England," added the Dowager Viscountess of Bramwell, her voice barely above a whisper. "Owner of estates in 5 counties, with an annual income that exceeds that of most foreign princes. And we called him a nobody," Lady Beatrice said, her voice hollow with the realization of how thoroughly she had humiliated herself. "We mocked Emily Carter for marrying beneath her station when she was actually making the match of the century." "But why?" Lady Sinclair asked desperately. "Why would a duke masquerade as a tradesman? What could he possibly hope to gain from such an elaborate deception? Perhaps he wanted to test Miss Carter's character, suggested Lady Catherine Blackwood, who had arrived that morning with the latest gossip from her network of well-placed servants. Perhaps he wanted to ensure that she loved him for himself rather than his title and fortune. Then he succeeded admirably, the Dowager Viscountess observed with grudging admiration. Miss Carter accepted his proposal when she believed him to be a man of modest means. She can hardly be accused of fortune-hunting now. No, Lady Beatrice agreed bitterly, but we can certainly be accused of being blind, foolish, and utterly lacking in judgment. Do you realize what this means for our reputations? We've spent weeks publicly mocking what turns out to be one of the most advantageous matches of the season. The implications of their error were indeed staggering. In a society where one's ability to accurately assess social situations was crucial to maintaining one's position, their complete failure to recognize the Duke of Ravenshollow had marked them as either hopelessly naive or dangerously out of touch with current affairs. "What do we do now?" Lady Sinclair asked, her voice carrying a note of panic. "How do we recover from such a public display of poor judgment?" "We apologize," Lady Catherine said firmly. "We admit our error, congratulate Miss Carter on her excellent match, and hope that the Duke is gracious enough to overlook our previous comments." "Apologize?" Lady Beatrice looked horrified at the suggestion. "To Emily Carter? After everything we've said about her and her choice of husband?" "Especially after everything we've said," Lady Catherine replied coolly. "The girl is about to become one of the most powerful women in England. Continuing to antagonize her would be the height of foolishness." Meanwhile, in another part of London, a very different conversation was taking place in the masculine sanctuary of Brooks's Club, where the male members of society were grappling with their own shock at the revelation. "Ravenshollow," Lord Pemberton was saying to his companions over brandy and cigars, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. "The man we've been dismissing as a tradesman is actually Ravenshollow." "Brilliant strategy when you think about it," observed Lord Hartwell with grudging respect. "He managed to court the Earl of Westbrook's daughter without any of the usual complications that come with ducal courtships. No ambitious mothers pushing their daughters at him, no fortune hunters trying to trap him into marriage, no political considerations affecting his choice. And he found himself a bride who accepted him when she believed he had nothing to offer but himself," added Lord Sinclair. "That's worth more than all the dowries and connections in England. Still seems like a rather extreme approach to courtship," Lord Pemberton observed. "Surely there must have been simpler ways to determine Miss Carter's true character." "Perhaps," Lord Hartwell agreed, "but none that would have been as conclusive. Now he knows beyond any doubt that his future wife loves him for himself rather than his title. And Miss Carter knows that she's made the match of the century," Lord Sinclair added with a laugh, "though I suspect she's feeling rather overwhelmed by the revelation at the moment." "Overwhelmed might be an understatement," Lord Pemberton said thoughtfully. "The poor girl has just discovered that everything she thought she knew about her fiancé was a carefully constructed fiction. That would be unsettling for anyone. But surely she must be pleased with the outcome," Lord Hartwell protested. "She's gone from marrying a tradesman to marrying one of the most powerful men in England. What woman wouldn't be delighted by such a turn of events? A woman who values honesty above social advancement," Lord Sinclair replied quietly. "And from what I've observed of Miss Carter, she strikes me as exactly that sort of woman." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of young Lord Thornbury, who burst into the room with the kind of breathless excitement that suggested he was bearing news of considerable importance. "Have you heard?" he asked without preamble. "About the Duke of Ravenshollow and Miss Carter?" "We've heard about his true identity," Lord Pemberton replied. "Is there more to the story?" "There's a rumor that Miss Carter has called off the engagement," Lord Thornbury announced, causing a collective gasp from his audience. "Apparently she's so upset about the deception that she's refused to see him." "Called off the engagement?" Lord Hartwell looked incredulous. "To the Duke of Ravenshollow? The woman must be mad." "Or principled," Lord Sinclair observed thoughtfully. "Perhaps she feels that a marriage built on deception is no marriage at all, regardless of the advantages it might bring." "But surely she must see reason eventually," Lord Pemberton protested. "The match is too advantageous to abandon over a matter of wounded pride." "Is it wounded pride?" Lord Sinclair asked, "or wounded trust? There's a significant difference between the two." Back at Westbrook House, Emily sat in her bedroom staring out at the garden where she and Nicholas had walked just days earlier, when she had still believed him to be the modest tradesman she had fallen in love with. The revelation of his true identity had turned her world upside down. leaving her questioning everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and her own judgment. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding, and she turned to see her mother entering with the kind of cautious expression that suggested she was approaching a potentially explosive situation. "Emily, darling," Lady Westbrook said gently, settling herself in the chair beside her daughter's window seat. "We need to talk about this situation with Mr. Ashford, or rather, with the Duke of Ravenshollow." "There's nothing to talk about," Emily replied flatly. "He lied to me, Mama, about everything that matters." "He lied about his circumstances," Lady Westbrook corrected carefully. "But surely his feelings for you are genuine. A man doesn't go to such elaborate lengths to court a woman unless he truly cares for her." "A man doesn't lie to a woman he truly cares for," Emily countered. "If he loved me, he would have trusted me with the truth." "Perhaps he was afraid of losing you," Lady Westbrook suggested. "Perhaps he had been hurt before by women who were more interested in his title than his character." "Then he should have given me the chance to prove that I was different," Emily said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "Instead, he decided to test me without my knowledge, as if I were some sort of experiment rather than a person deserving of honesty and respect." Lady Westbrook was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Emily, I understand that you're hurt and angry. You have every right to feel betrayed, but you must also consider the practical implications of your decision." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the Duke of Ravenshollow has offered to pay our debts," Lady Westbrook said gently. "All of them. He can save our family from complete ruin, Emily. He can preserve our home, our position, our future." "At what cost?" Emily asked bitterly. "My self-respect? My ability to trust the man I'm supposed to spend my life with?" "At the cost of accepting that people sometimes make mistakes in how they handle delicate situations," Lady Westbrook replied. "Emily, the Duke made an error in judgment. He should have been honest with you from the beginning, but his motives weren't malicious, and his offer to help our family is genuine." "You want me to marry him for his money?" Emily said, her voice flat with disappointment. "You want me to overlook his deception because he can solve our financial problems? I want you to consider all aspects of the situation before you make a decision that will affect not just your future, but the future of our entire family," Lady Westbrook said firmly. "Emily, I've seen how you look at him. I've seen how he looks at you. Whatever else may be true, there is genuine affection between you. Perhaps that's worth preserving, even if the foundation needs to be rebuilt." Emily turned back to the window, watching the gardeners tend to the roses that might soon belong to strangers if her family's debts weren't paid. She couldn't deny that her mother's words carried weight. Nicholas's offer to help could save everything her family held dear, and his feelings for her did seem genuine, even if his methods had been questionable. But could she really marry a man who had deceived her so completely? Could she build a life with someone she was no longer sure she could trust? "I need more time," Emily said finally. "I need to think about this without the pressure of our financial situation clouding my judgment." "Of course," Lady Westbrook agreed, though her voice carried a note of urgency. "But, Emily, please remember that we only have a few days before the creditors expect payment. Whatever you decide about the Duke, we need to make arrangements for our debts." "I understand," Emily said quietly. "And Mama, I do appreciate that you're trying to help. I know this situation is difficult for everyone." After her mother left, Emily remained at the window, watching the shadows lengthen across the garden as afternoon faded into evening. Somewhere in London, Nicholas was waiting for her decision, probably wondering if his revelation had cost him the woman he claimed to love. And Emily was wondering if love could survive such a fundamental breach of trust, or if some deceptions were simply too great to overcome, regardless of the advantages they might bring. The answer, she realized, would determine not just her own future, but the fate of everyone she held dear. Love redeemed. 3 months had passed since the shocking revelation of Nicholas's true identity, 3 months during which London society had buzzed with speculation about the fate of the most talked-about engagement of the season. Some predicted that Emily Carter would eventually succumb to the practical advantages of marrying a duke, while others insisted that her pride would never allow her to forgive such a fundamental deception. The truth, as it often did, proved to be more complex than either camp had imagined. Emily stood before the mirror in her bedroom at Westbrook House, adjusting the sapphire necklace that had been her grandmother's and smoothing the silk of her wedding gown, a creation of ivory and silver that had been designed to complement her auburn hair and emerald eyes. Today was her wedding day, but the path to this moment had been far from simple. After Nicholas's revelation, Emily had indeed called off their engagement, unable to reconcile her feelings of betrayal with her continued love for the man she had thought she knew. For weeks they had not spoken, while Emily struggled to understand her own heart, and Nicholas respected her need for space to process his deception. It had been Charlotte who had finally forced them to confront their feelings honestly. Emily's younger sister had arranged a meeting between them in the garden of Westbrook House, refusing to allow either of them to leave until they had talked through their differences like rational adults, rather than wounded children. "You're both being idiots," Charlotte had announced with the blunt honesty that only younger sisters could get away with. "Nicholas, you were wrong to deceive Emily, and you need to admit that without making excuses. Emily, you're wrong to throw away genuine love because of wounded pride, and you need to admit that too." The conversation that followed had been painful, honest, and ultimately healing. Nicholas had acknowledged that his deception had been wrong, regardless of his motivations, and had promised complete honesty in all their future dealings. Emily had admitted that her anger had been fueled as much by embarrassment at being deceived as by the deception itself, and that she had perhaps been too quick to assume the worst about his motives. "I love you," Nicholas had said simply, taking her hands in his as they sat beside the fountain where they had shared so many conversations. "I love your intelligence, your kindness, your strength, and your integrity. I loved you when I thought I was a tradesman who could offer you nothing but a modest life, and I love you now that I can offer you everything the world considers valuable. The only thing that's changed is my ability to provide for you, not my feelings for you." "And I love you," Emily had replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But Nicholas, if we're going to build a life together, it has to be built on truth, complete truth, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. Always," Nicholas had promised. "No more secrets, no more deceptions, no matter how well-intentioned." Their reconciliation had been the talk of London society, with opinions divided between those who admired Emily's principled stand and eventual forgiveness, and those who thought she was foolish to have risked losing such an advantageous match over a matter of wounded feelings. But Emily had learned to care less about society's opinions and more about her own happiness and the genuine love she shared with the man who was about to become her husband. "Are you ready, my dear?" Lady Westbrook asked, entering the room with tears of joy shining in her eyes. "The carriage is waiting, and I believe your Duke is growing rather anxious to see you." "He's not my Duke yet," Emily replied with a smile, "but yes, I'm ready." The wedding ceremony took place at St. George's, Hanover Square, in front of a congregation that included not only the cream of London society, many of whom were still adjusting to their new understanding of the Duke of Ravenshollow's character, but also representatives from Nicholas's various estates and business interests, people who had known him as both the modest man he had pretended to be and the powerful Duke he actually was. As Emily walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw Nicholas waiting for her at the altar, resplendent in his formal wedding attire but with the same kind grey eyes that had first attracted her to him. The title, the wealth, the power, all of that was real, but so was the man she had fallen in love with, and that was what mattered most. "Do you, Nicholas Edward Ashford, Duke of Ravenshollow, take Emily Rose to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the Archbishop asked. "I do," Nicholas replied, his voice strong and clear, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. "With all my heart, with complete honesty, and with the promise that I will never again give you reason to doubt my love or my integrity." "And do you, Emily Rose Carter, take Nicholas Edward to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Emily said, her voice equally steady despite the tears of joy that threatened to fall. "With all my heart, with complete forgiveness, and with the promise that I will always trust in the love we share." When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers that seemed to echo through the ancient church. Nicholas and Emily had overcome deception, betrayal, and wounded pride to find their way back to each other, and their joy was infectious. The wedding breakfast was held at Ravenshollow House, Nicholas's magnificent London mansion, which Emily was seeing for the first time as its new mistress. The house was everything she might have expected from a ducal residence, grand, elegant, and filled with treasures collected over generations, but it was the warmth with which Nicholas's staff welcomed her that made it feel like home. "To the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow," toasted Lord Hartwell, who had become one of their strongest supporters during the difficult months of their separation and reconciliation. "May your love be an example to us all that honesty and forgiveness can overcome any obstacle." As the afternoon wore on and the guests gradually departed, Nicholas and Emily found themselves alone in the garden of Ravenshollow House, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you regret it?" Nicholas asked, a question that had become something of a ritual between them. "Marrying a man who deceived you so thoroughly?" "Never," Emily replied, leaning against his side with the kind of contentment that came from knowing she had made the right choice. "I regret that we had to go through so much pain to get here, but I don't regret the destination." "And the gossips? The people who mocked you for marrying beneath your station?" Emily laughed, thinking of the dramatic reversal in society's opinion of her match. "They've been remarkably quick to congratulate me on my excellent judgment in recognizing your true worth, despite your humble disguise. Apparently, I'm now credited with unusual perception rather than desperate circumstances." "How convenient for them," Nicholas observed dryly. "And how do you feel about their change of heart?" "I feel that their opinions matter far less than I once thought they did," Emily replied honestly. "I've learned that the only approval that truly matters is my own, and the love of the people who actually know and care about me." "Speaking of people who care about you," Nicholas said, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a small velvet box, "I have something for you." "Nicholas, you've already given me everything," Emily protested, but he was already opening the box to reveal a stunning emerald necklace that matched her eyes perfectly. "This belonged to my mother," he said, lifting the necklace from its case with gentle hands. "She was a woman who valued honesty above all else, and I think she would have approved of your refusal to accept anything less than complete truth from the man you married." As Nicholas fastened the necklace around her throat, Emily felt the weight of history and tradition settling around her shoulders. She was no longer just Emily Carter, the Earl's daughter who had been mocked for her choice of husband. She was the Duchess of Ravenshollow, one of the most powerful women in England, and she had earned that position through her own integrity and strength of character. "Thank you," she whispered, touching the emeralds with reverent fingers, "for everything. For loving me enough to want to be worthy of me. For being honest with me even when it was difficult. For showing me that real love is worth fighting for." "Thank you," Nicholas replied, his voice thick with emotion. "For being strong enough to demand the truth. For being generous enough to forgive my mistakes. For proving that the best things in life are worth waiting for, even when the wait is painful." As they stood together in the fading light, Emily reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. She had been mocked for marrying a simple man, only to discover that he was one of the most powerful men in England. But more importantly, she had learned that true worth had nothing to do with titles or fortunes, and everything to do with character, integrity, and the courage to love honestly. "What happens now?" Emily asked, settling more comfortably against Nicholas's side as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Now we live," Nicholas said simply. "We build a life together based on complete honesty and mutual respect. We use our position and resources to make a positive difference in the world, and we prove to everyone, including ourselves, that love built on truth is stronger than anything society can throw at us. And if people continue to gossip about our unconventional courtship, then we'll give them something worth talking about," Nicholas replied with a smile that was both loving and mischievous. "We'll show them what a marriage looks like when it's based on genuine partnership rather than social convenience." Emily smiled, thinking of the future they would build together. It would be a life of privilege and responsibility, certainly, but more than that, it would be a life of purpose and meaning. They had both learned valuable lessons about the importance of honesty, the danger of assumptions, and the power of forgiveness. "I have a confession to make," Emily said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of mischief that made Nicholas look at her with curiosity. "Please tell me you're not about to reveal that you've been hiding a secret identity as well," Nicholas said with mock alarm. "I don't think my heart could take another revelation of that magnitude." Emily laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the evening air. "Nothing quite so dramatic, but I must admit that even when I believed you were a tradesman, I sometimes wondered if there was more to you than met the eye." "What do you mean?" "Little things," Emily explained. "The way you carried yourself, as if you were accustomed to command. The quality of your education, which seemed far superior to what most tradesmen would have received. Your knowledge of politics and society, your ease in social situations, despite your supposedly modest background. And you never questioned these inconsistencies?" "I questioned them," Emily admitted. "But I told myself that you were simply an exceptional man who had risen above his circumstances through intelligence and hard work. I wanted to believe that such things were possible." "They are possible," Nicholas said seriously. There are many men who have achieved great success through their own efforts, rather than inherited advantages. I simply wasn't one of them. No, but you could have been, Emily observed. The man I fell in love with, the kind, intelligent, principled man you showed me, that man could have succeeded in any circumstances. The title and fortune are just additional advantages, not the source of your worth. Nicholas felt his heart swell with love for this remarkable woman who had seen past his deception to the man he truly was, who had forgiven his mistakes and chosen to build a future with him despite the pain he had caused her. I love you, Emily Ashford, he said, using her new name for the first time. My Duchess, my partner, my heart. And I love you, Nicholas Ashford, she replied, her voice filled with the same wonder and gratitude that had characterized their entire relationship. My husband, my duke, my everything. 1 year later, the annual Ravenshollow Charity Ball was in full swing. The grand ballroom of the ducal mansion filled with the cream of London society, all gathered to support the various philanthropic causes that had become the Duke and Duchess's passion. It was exactly 1 year since Emily had learned the truth about Nicholas's identity, and the transformation in both their lives and their standing in society had been remarkable. Emily moved through the ballroom with the grace and confidence of a woman who had found her true place in the world. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented both her coloring and the magnificent emerald necklace that had become her signature piece, and her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant style that emphasized the classical beauty of her features. But it was the happiness in her emerald eyes and the easy way she moved among her guests that truly marked the transformation from the uncertain young woman she had once been. Your Grace, Lady Beatrice Harrington approached, with the kind of deferential smile that would have been unthinkable during the early days of Emily's engagement. What a magnificent event this is. The decorations are absolutely stunning. Thank you, Lady Beatrice, Emily replied graciously, though she couldn't help but remember the cruel comments this same woman had made about her choice of husband just over a year ago. I'm so pleased you could join us tonight. Your support means a great deal to our cause. Of course, Lady Beatrice gushed. The work you and the Duke are doing with the foundling hospitals is truly admirable. Such compassion, such dedication to helping those less fortunate. Emily accepted the praise with appropriate modesty, though she was well aware that Lady Beatrice's sudden interest in charitable causes had more to do with currying favor with one of the most powerful couples in England than with any genuine concern for orphaned children. If you'll excuse me, Emily said politely, I should check on the auction preparations. We're hoping to raise a substantial sum tonight for the new children's wing. As she moved away from Lady Beatrice, Emily caught sight of Nicholas across the room, engaged in animated conversation with a group of gentlemen who were clearly hanging on his every word. Even after a year of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart skip a beat. He looked magnificent in his formal evening wear, his dark hair gleaming in the candlelight, and his grey eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. But more than his physical appearance, it was the way he carried himself that drew her attention. This was a man completely comfortable with his position and authority, someone who had learned to balance the responsibilities of his title with the genuine desire to use his influence for good. Admiring your handiwork, came a familiar voice beside her, and Emily turned to see Charlotte approaching with a glass of champagne and a knowing smile. What do you mean? Emily asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. I mean the way you've transformed your husband from a man hiding behind a false identity into someone who's completely comfortable being exactly who he is, Charlotte replied, with the kind of sisterly insight that could be both annoying and remarkably perceptive. I think you give me too much credit, Emily said modestly. Nicholas was always a good man. He just needed to learn that he didn't have to hide his true self to be worthy of love. And you needed to learn that love is worth fighting for, even when it's complicated and messy, and doesn't follow the rules society expects, Charlotte observed. You've both grown tremendously this past year. Emily considered this, thinking about how much her life had changed since that shocking evening when Nicholas had revealed his true identity. The anger and betrayal she had felt then seemed almost foreign to her now, replaced by a deep understanding of the fears and insecurities that had driven his deception. We've learned to trust each other completely, Emily said finally. Not just with our hearts, but with our fears, our doubts, our imperfections. That's made all the difference. And society has learned not to underestimate either of you, Charlotte added with satisfaction. Do you remember how they mocked you for marrying beneath your station? Now they compete for invitations to your events and hang on your every word. "Society's opinion matters far less to me now than it did then," Emily replied honestly. "I've learned that the only approval worth having is your own, and the love of the people who truly know and care about you." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Nicholas, who had extracted himself from his group of admirers and was making his way toward his wife with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was the only person in the room who mattered to him. "Ladies," he said, offering a bow that was perfectly appropriate for the formal setting while managing to convey genuine affection. "I hope you're enjoying the evening." "It's wonderful," Charlotte replied enthusiastically, "though I think I'll go investigate the dessert table and leave you two to your ducal duties." After Charlotte departed with a meaningful look, Nicholas and Emily found themselves with a moment of relative privacy in the crowded ballroom. "How are we doing with the auction?" Nicholas asked, his voice carrying the kind of practical concern that had made their charitable endeavors so successful. "Better than expected," Emily replied with satisfaction. "Lord Pemberton bid an absolutely outrageous sum for that landscape painting, and Lady Thornbury seems determined to outbid everyone for the diamond bracelet." "Excellent. And the Foundling Hospital Committee? Thrilled with our progress. Dr. Morrison says the new wing should be completed within 6 months, and we'll be able to house an additional 50 children. Nicholas smiled, his grey eyes bright with the kind of satisfaction that came from using one's advantages to make a real difference in the world. "I never imagined that being a duke could be so fulfilling," he said quietly. "When I inherited the title, I saw it primarily as a burden, all responsibility and social obligation with very little personal satisfaction. And now I see it as an opportunity to use our position and resources to help people who need it, to set an example of what marriage and partnership can look like, to prove that privilege comes with responsibility." Emily felt her heart swell with love and pride for this remarkable man who had learned to embrace his true identity while never forgetting the lessons he had learned during his time as a supposed tradesman. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice carrying a note of excitement that made Nicholas's attention focus entirely on her. "What is it?" "I'm with child," Emily said simply, watching as joy and wonder spread across his features. "We're going to have a baby." Nicholas's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around in a circle before remembering where they were, and setting her gently back on her feet, his face radiant with happiness. "A baby," he repeated as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Emily asked, though his expression left little doubt about his feelings. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Nicholas replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm ecstatic, terrified, overwhelmed, and more grateful than I ever thought possible." "Terrified?" Emily asked with a laugh that drew the attention of several nearby guests. "Terrified that I won't be a good enough father, that I won't be able to give our child the kind of honest, loving upbringing that will help them become the person they're meant to be." "You'll be a wonderful father," Emily said firmly, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Our child will grow up knowing they are loved unconditionally, that their worth comes from who they are rather than what they possess. They'll learn that honesty is more valuable than any title or fortune, and that real strength comes from admitting your mistakes and learning from them. And they'll learn that love, real love, can overcome any obstacle," Nicholas added, his grey eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. As they stood together in their magnificent ballroom, surrounded by the sounds of their guests' laughter and conversation, Emily marveled at how far they had come. A year ago she had been a young woman mocked by society for her choice of husband, convinced that she was marrying beneath her station. Now she was one of the most respected and influential women in England, married to a man who had proven that true worth had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with character. "Do you think," Emily asked, "that our child will grow up in a world that's more accepting of love that defies expectations?" "I think," Nicholas replied, "that our child will grow up knowing that they have the power to create the world they want to live in. They'll understand that change begins with individuals who are brave enough to stand up for what they believe in, regardless of what others might think. And if they face the same kind of judgment we faced, if society tries to make them feel ashamed of who they are or the choices they make, then they'll have the example of their parents to guide them," Nicholas said firmly. "They'll know that we faced society's mockery and emerged stronger for it. They'll understand that the opinion of the crowd is rarely worth the breath it takes to express it, and that the only approval that truly matters is their own." Emily smiled, thinking of the child growing within her and the world they would help create for the next generation. It would be a world where character mattered more than circumstances, where honesty was valued above social convenience, and where love was strong enough to overcome any deception or misunderstanding. "I love you, Nicholas Ashford," she said, using his full name as she had on their wedding day. "Thank you for teaching me that the best love stories are the ones that begin with the most unlikely circumstances." "And I love you, Emily Ashford," he replied, his voice filled with the same wonder and gratitude that had characterized their entire relationship. "Thank you for showing me that being true to yourself is more important than meeting other people's expectations. Thank you for proving that forgiveness and understanding can heal even the deepest wounds." As the evening continued around them, and their guests celebrated both their charitable success and their obvious happiness, Nicholas and Emily stood together in the center of it all, two people who had found each other through deception, but had built something beautiful and lasting on a foundation of truth. Their story would be remembered not as a cautionary tale about the dangers of dishonesty, but as proof that love could triumph over any obstacle when it was based on genuine respect and understanding. They had shown London society that appearances could be deceiving, that assumptions were dangerous, and that the most beautiful endings often came from the most complicated beginnings. The young woman who had been mocked for marrying a simple man had discovered that she had actually chosen one of the most extraordinary men of her generation. The Duke, who had hidden behind a false identity, had learned that his true self was worthy of love and respect. Together, they had created something that was greater than the sum of its parts, a partnership that would endure whatever challenges the future might bring, and a legacy that would inspire others to choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and hope over despair. As the last guests departed and the candles burned low in the grand ballroom, Nicholas and Emily walked hand in hand through their magnificent home, ready to face whatever adventures awaited them with the unshakable knowledge that they would face them together. They had found in each other not just love but partnership, not just passion but purpose, and not just happiness but the kind of deep contentment that comes from knowing one has found their true place in the world. Their love story was complete, but their life together was just beginning, filled with the promise of children to raise, causes to champion, and a love that would only grow stronger with each passing year. Did Nicholas and Emily's journey from deception to true love capture your heart? If this tale of hidden identity and ultimate redemption moved you, please like this story and subscribe for more captivating Regency romances. Share this with someone who believes that love conquers all, and let us know in the comments. Which moment touched you most? The shocking revelation or their beautiful reconciliation? Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest romantic adventures.